So much for shedding some light into what went on at the White House today. Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
We're going to show you now a live look at the White House Rose Garden. We are waiting for President Trump to discuss what we believe will be an executive order to gather information on citizenship status. We believe he is going to announce a way of getting at that information without including it on the 2020 census. We will, of course, bring that to you live as soon as it begins. The Trump administration is re-examining the role of human rights in U.S. foreign policy. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced the Unalienable Rights Commission last week. CBS News learned it will function as a study group. Pompeo said the panel was launched in part to address international institutions that have, quote, drifted from their original mission.
We must, therefore, be vigilant that human rights discourse not be corrupted or hijacked or used for dubious or malignant purposes. It's a sad commentary on our times that more than 70 years after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, gross violations continue throughout the world, sometimes even in the name of human rights.
A senior State Department official told CBS News both sides of the aisle were consulted prior to the announcement. However, critics assert the commission could be used to reverse progressive policies. Democratic Congressman Tom Malinowski joins me now. He is also the former Assistant Secretary for Human Rights during the Obama administration. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. You sit on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. You recently said that you fear Pompeo's new commission could attempt to, quote, redefine what human rights mean. Can you explain what you meant by that?
I think they may try to do it. They're not going to succeed. Look, what's happening here is that the administration has been criticized rightly for the president cozying up to dictators around the world, not taking human rights seriously in our foreign policy. And I think instead of addressing those concerns and doing a little bit better, the administration, or at least the State Department, is making this effort to raise questions about what human rights really are, what they mean, to muddy the waters, to confuse people. And that is concerning because it's very similar to what dictators like Putin are trying to do. You talk to them about human rights and they'll say, well, what does it really mean? Different cultures have different definitions of human rights. And I don't want to see the United States being anything less than absolutely certain that there are human rights values that apply to everybody equally in the world, and they must be respected.
I think, in this country, we all assume we have a pretty clear idea of what that means. Can you give us an example of where this commission might be able to slide a little bit in the way you are describing?
So I'll to be honest, I've read Secretary Pompeo's statements on this and even some of the writings of the members of this commission, and I'm kind of confused. I don't really know what they believe.
I'm sorry, I just can't answer that question, and that's after spending billions and billions of dollars. There used to be a time when you could answer questions like that very easily. There used to be a time when you could proudly declare, I am a citizen of the United States. Now they're trying to erase the very existence of a very important word and a very important thing, citizenship. They're even coming after the Pledge of Allegiance in Minnesota. I'm proud to be a citizen. You're proud to be a citizen. The only people who are not proud to be citizens are the ones who are fighting us all the way about the word citizen. Today I'm here to say we are not backing down on our effort to determine the citizenship status of the United States population. I stand before you to outline new steps my administration is taking to ensure that citizenship is counted so that we know how many citizens we have in the United States. Make sense? We will defend the right of the American people to know the full facts about the population, size of citizens and non-citizens in America. It is essential that we have a clear breakdown of the number of citizens and non-citizens that make up the U.S. populations. Imperative. Knowing this information is vital to formulating sound public policy, whether the issue is health care, education, civil rights, or immigration. We must have a reliable count of how many citizens, non-citizens, and illegal aliens are in our country. The Department of Commerce sensibly decided to include a citizenship question in the 2020 census, as has been done many, many times throughout the history of the United States. Unfortunately, this effort was delayed by meritless litigation. As shocking as it may be, far-left Democrats in our country are determined to conceal the number of illegal aliens in our midst. They probably know the number is far greater, much higher than anyone would have ever believed before. Maybe that's why they fight so hard. This is part of a broader left-wing effort to erode the rights of the American citizen and is very unfair to our country. The Supreme Court ultimately affirmed our right to ask the citizenship question, and very strongly it was affirmed. But the Supreme Court also ruled that we must provide further explanation that would have produced even more litigation and considerable time delays. The case is already in 3 federal district courts that have been, to be totally honest, extremely unfriendly to us. These delays would have prevented us from completing the census on time. It's deeply regrettable, but it will not stop us from collecting the needed information, and I think even in greater detail and more accurately. Therefore, we are pursuing a new option to ensure a complete and timely count of the non-citizen population. Today, I will be issuing an executive order to put this very plan into effect immediately. I am hereby ordering every department and agency in the federal government to provide the Department of Commerce with all requested records regarding the number of citizens and non-citizens in our country. They must furnish all legally accessible records in their possession immediately. We will utilize these vast federal databases to gain a full, complete, and accurate count of the non-citizen population, including databases maintained by the Department of Homeland Security and the Social Security Administration. We have great knowledge in many of our agencies. We will leave no stone unturned. The Census Bureau projected that using previously available records, it could determine citizenship for 90% of our population or more. With today's executive order, which eliminates longstanding obstacles to data sharing, we're aiming to count everyone. Ultimately, this will allow us to have an even more complete count of citizens than through asking the single question alone. It will be, we think, far more accurate. The Census Bureau can use this information along with information collected through the questionnaire to create the official census. In other words, as a result of today's executive order, we will be able to ensure the 2020 census generates an accurate count of how many citizens, non-citizens, and illegal aliens are in the United States of America. Not too much to ask. This will greatly inform a wide array of public policy decisions. This information is also relevant to administering our elections. Some states may want to draw state and local legislative districts based upon the voter-eligible population. Indeed, the same day the Supreme Court handed down the census decision, it also said it would not review certain types of districting decisions, which could encourage states to make such decisions based on voter eligibility. With today's order, we will collect all of the information we need to conduct an accurate census and to make responsible decisions about public policy, voting rights, and representation in Congress. In everything we do, we will faithfully represent the people of the United States of America. I would like now to introduce Attorney General Bill Barr to the podium. Thank you. Thank you, Bill.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. President, and congratulations on today's executive order, which will ensure that we finally have an accurate understanding of how many citizens and non-citizens live in our country. As the Supreme Court recognized, it would be perfectly lawful for the federal government to ask on the census whether individuals are citizens of the United States. And it's entirely reasonable to want to know how many citizens and non-citizens there are in the United States. In fact, the federal government has routinely asked questions relating to citizenship ever since the 1820s. But while the Supreme Court correctly recognized that it would be entirely appropriate to include citizenship questions on the census, it nevertheless held that the Commerce Department did not adequately explain its decisions for doing so on the 2020 census. Because, as the Supreme Court recognized, the defect in the Commerce Department's decision was curable with a better record, the President asked me to work with Secretary Ross to determine whether there remained a viable path for including a citizenship question on the census. I did so. In my view, the government has ample justification to inquire about citizenship status on the census and could plainly provide rationales for doing so that would satisfy the Supreme Court. And therefore, there is no question that a new decision to add the question would ultimately survive legal review. The problem is that any new decision would be subject to immediate challenge as a new claim in the 3 ongoing district court cases. In addition, there are injunctions currently in place that forbid adding the question. There is simply no way to litigate these issues and obtain relief from the current injunctions in time to implement any new decision without jeopardizing our ability to carry out the census, which we're not going to do. We're not going to jeopardize our ability to carry out the census. So as a practical matter, the Supreme Court's decision closed all paths to adding the question to the 2020 census. Put simply, the impediment was a logistical impediment, not a legal one. We simply cannot complete the litigation in time to carry out the census. One other point on this. Some in the media have been suggesting, in the hysterical mode of the day, that the administration has been planning to add the citizenship question to the census by executive fiat without regard to contrary court orders or what the Supreme Court might say. This has been based on rank speculation and nothing more. As should be obvious, this has never been under consideration. We have always accepted that any new decision to add a citizenship question to the census would be subject to judicial review. Turning to today, I applaud the President for recognizing in his executive order that including a question on the census is not the only way to obtain this vital information. The course the President has chosen today will bring unprecedented resources to bear on determining how many citizens and non-citizens are in our country, and will yield the best data the government has had on citizenship in many decades. That information will be used for countless purposes, as the President explained in his remarks today. For example, there is a current dispute over whether illegal aliens can be included for apportionment purposes. Depending on the resolution of that dispute, this data may be relevant to those considerations. We will be studying this issue. Congratulations again, Mr. President, on taking this effective action. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much.
All right, we just just heard President Trump announcing that he is issuing an executive order to every department and agency in the United States to give the Commerce Department all and every record of citizenship that these agencies possess. He is no longer pursuing the citizenship question on the 2020 census, but he says he believes that along with the census and all of this information, all of this data sharing between agencies and departments, he will then have the most complete picture of the number of citizens and non-citizens in this country. We then also heard from the Attorney General, William Barr, who several times congratulated the president on his executive order. Let's bring in now Kim Whaley. Kim is a CBS News legal analyst and author of the new book, How to Read the Constitution and Why. Kim, this executive order would mandate that all agencies and departments share data that they've collected about citizens and non-citizens, correct? Will there be a legal challenge to that?
Well, it depends on whether there are any regulatory or statutory limitations on one agency sharing information with another agency. Presumably, for example, if a federal employee or contractor underwent a top secret security clearance background check, that is not the kind of information that would necessarily be freely shared. But this is really, I think, a public relations kind of covering the president's position on this, frankly, because the Census Bureau already collects citizenship information on a different document called the American Community Survey. It's not one that is attached to the census, but this is data that the government has been collecting, maybe not in the most comprehensive way. But I think the other thing to point out is the president's not saying that he's doing a data collection from individual people. That would become a problem under the Federal Records Act. That has to be vetted before the government can get information directly from citizens. And in addition, the president mentioned gerrymandering and this idea that the information could be used to decide districts, voting districts. But it's unclear whether the federal government, even if it collects within the federal government in one database this information, if that could be automatically shared with the states. The states draw up those districts, not the federal government. So I think nothing that Attorney General Barr said was incorrect. What the president said in terms of suggesting that the Democrats or there's some political push to forbid this information from being collected, that's just not accurate. I don't think legally this really makes much of a change. It's about moving information within the federal government, and I doubt without a Freedom of Information Act request, which takes months, the public or the press will even know what this actually produces.
So then do you see this, all the pomp and circumstance around this executive order, do you see this as a kind of showboating, just saving face with his base?
I do, because Mr. Barr said, listen, we don't have the time to go through the proper legal challenges to either change the rationale for adding the citizenship question, which was what the Commerce Secretary had a problem with at the Supreme Court, or doing it by executive order. Both of those things are going to face legal challenges, and Mr. Barr correctly said there just is not enough time. There's a hard deadline under the Census Act, the statute governing this, April 1st, 2020. So regardless of whether the printing presses could print faster, even if we stretch this out a few weeks, the legal challenges would not be resolved in time for the printing for April 1st. So this is a done deal for the 2020 census, and this executive order is not going to change anything with respect to the census. It's not going to change anything with respect to the information used by the census in terms of determining how many representatives in Congress each state gets.
Right.
He mentioned gerrymandering. That's different. That's how you carve up the districts once you decide how many representatives each state gets, deciding what a district is. It's not going to change the number of representatives per state, which I think there's record evidence that was one of the objectives behind adding this, was to have a smaller count for blue states, for for individuals and to allow for blue districts. And secondly, it's not going to affect federal funding for states, which is another outcome of the actual census. The census numbers will not change by virtue of this executive order. So I would say it is window dressing. It's political covered for the president who fought so hard after the Supreme Court. And it looks like his lawyers came back and said, listen, the Supreme Court's decision stands. We cannot get around it. And I think, frankly, that's a good thing for the separation of powers. It's a good thing for democracy. It's a good thing for the integrity of our constitutional system.
Also with us is CBS News correspondent Ben Tracy. Ben, do you share Kim's view that this was all a little bit of much ado about nothing in light of the fact that the Supreme Court's decision will stand?
It's hard to avoid the politics of this. I mean, when you heard the president open his mouth there at the very beginning in the Rose Garden and kind of mockingly ask that question, are you a citizen, and say, oh, gee, we used to be able to ask these kinds of questions, that was a variation of what he does on the campaign trail, a toned-down variation, a more, I guess you would say, presidential variation of that. But it had the feeling of some of the things that he likes to kind of riff on and rail about when he is out there on the trail, saying that they, the kind of anonymous they, are trying to take away the very definition of what it means to be a citizen, that we can't even ask these kinds of questions anymore. So certainly there were some politics here. And I thought one of the really interesting things is what you did not hear the president talk about is the rationale, the reasoning that his own administration used when it went before the Supreme Court. If you remember, the Commerce Department basically said their rationale for this was that they were trying to protect the Voting Rights Act and minority voters. The Supreme Court didn't buy that. They basically said that this reasoning seems contrived. They said this seems more like a distraction than an explanation. You didn't hear the president talk about it at all. They've thrown that argument out the window, and now he's basically saying we really need an accurate count of citizen versus non-citizen, and I'm going to try to get it by any means I can, and therefore you now have this executive order. I thought one really interesting part is he said, I think he said Democrats, or he may have said they, he said they want to conceal the number of illegal aliens in the country, which I think really did kind of reveal a bit of the motivation behind this.
All right, let's listen to some of what the president just said about why he is issuing this executive order. Let's listen.
Previously available records, it could determine citizenship for 90% of our population or more. With today's executive order, which eliminates longstanding obstacles to data sharing, we're aiming to count everyone. Ultimately, this will allow us to have an even more complete count of citizens than through asking the single question alone. It will be, we think, far more accurate. The Census Bureau can use this.
So, Kim, the president here is saying that his executive order, which will gather all of this data from all these various agencies and departments, will give him an even clearer picture than he would have had with just the census question. So if that's the case, why not do this in the first place?
Well, it's hard to understand if what he really wants is what he's identifying as information about non-citizens. You have to ask ourselves, how is that piece of information getting to the federal government? It would have to be through some kind of application for benefits, maybe school records. So it's difficult to understand how he would think people that are undocumented would somehow have given information to the federal government that then could be accurately used for a count of non-citizens. But as I mentioned earlier, we already know, and the Supreme Court said this in its decision, that the Census Bureau has collected this kind of information in data collection efforts that don't count for purposes of the actual census. So as I indicated before, this is not going to move the legal ball anywhere. It's not going to move the ball in terms of the actual result of the census, which is constitutionally required and has huge implications. It does probably help the president's kind of script on this, and I'm sure many people are confused when they hear, why can't we ask about the census? And Mr. Barr is absolutely correct. The Supreme Court said there's nothing in the enumeration clause that bans this information from being collected. The point is, if it's going to be collected, it has to go through the proper legal hoops, the bells and whistles to do so. Now, the question is, had Mr. Wilbur Ross said, honestly, listen, if this is actually the case, and there's evidence suggesting it, we want this so that we can somehow disenfranchise, in some regard, non-citizens for purposes of the implications of the census. That is, if we don't count them because they're afraid to actually answer the census, there'll be lower numbers in states that have a lot of non-citizens. Those states will then lose in terms of the effects of the actual census. Now, if Mr. Ross had said that, I don't know whether the Supreme Court would have said that's not an okay answer if that had been from the beginning the rationale. But as was said earlier by my colleague, the whole voting rights idea was an after the fact, let's find an excuse. And the court said, when you're doing something this important, we need a better reason, because at the end of the day, we're talking about unelected people within the Commerce Department executing something that the Constitution authorizes Congress to do. Congress,
right. Yeah. So Ben, I have a question now about the census. So we can assume that it will be printed on time now. It will not have the citizenship question. All questions surrounding that portion of it have been resolved. Is that correct?
Yeah, that ship had really already sailed before this event today. The census is currently being printed. This was not going to get on the census without some extraordinary measure that would have to take place for that to happen. But picking up on what Kim was just saying, there is a good chance at the White House, if their real rationale here is, and they have not said this publicly, but if their real rationale is here to disenfranchise people, to suppress turnout and participation with the census, they still may get what they were looking for. Simply by talking about this further, by confusing this issue, by muddying the waters, you have people who are just hearing bits and pieces of this, and if someone comes to your door and says, hey, I'm here with the United States government and we're doing the census, and if you are concerned that you might not have proper legal status or you're related to somebody who doesn't, you're probably not going to participate in the census. And a lot of people believe that is what the goal is here. Now, the White House has not said that, so we can't say that's exactly what they're doing, but that may, in fact, be the consequence.
So some of that damage may have already been done. Kim, I want to ask you about what the New York Times is also reporting, that ICE raids on thousands